What if some things you and your doctor call healthy are quietly making your insulin resistance worse? That sounds provocative, but there's a simple physiological thread that ties them together. Anything that keeps shoving more fuel at cells that are already full will eventually make those cells stop responding to insulin as well. In this video, I'll walk you through 7 common practices that look healthy on the surface but can increase insulin exposure or insulin action in ways that worsen insulin resistance, and I'll show what to consider instead. If you want clear, physiology-based explanations about how your metabolism actually works, subscribe now and stick with me for the whole list. Think of insulin as a storage manager. When you eat carbohydrates, blood glucose rises and insulin is released. Insulin's job isn't dramatic, it's mostly logistical. Move glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells to be burned for energy or tucked away as stored fuel. Imagine each cell has a storage locker or a deep freezer. If the lockers are empty, insulin gently opens them and stores fuel. But if the lockers are full, the cell begins to say "no more, thanks" by down-regulating insulin receptors and other transport mechanisms. That adaptive response is what we call insulin resistance. The cell refuses to accept more glucose because it already has enough. The core idea here is supply-driven. Chronic oversupply of carbohydrates and constant insulin signaling leads to cells that are less responsive. Anything that increases the amount of insulin or the frequency of insulin spikes or that forces more glucose into already full cells can make the problem worse, even if it seems healthy at first glance. Number 1. Insulin therapy used to mask high carbohydrate intake. Insulin is life-saving for people with type 1 diabetes and for many with advanced type 2 disease. It prevents dangerous high blood sugar and diabetic ketoacidosis. But in type 2 diabetes, where insulin is already high or being produced in excess, adding more insulin to counteract a very high carbohydrate diet can push more sugar into cells that are already saturated. That extra pushing does lower blood glucose numbers, which looks like success, but mechanistically it increases intracellular fuel load and the frequency of insulin exposure. The result, cells adapt further by becoming even less responsive, which can escalate the need for more insulin. A common real-world scenario is a person with type 2 diabetes prescribed escalating insulin doses to reach a glycemic target while their diet remains carb-heavy. Clinically, this lowers glucose readings, but does not remove the underlying driver, the steady supply of carbohydrate and insulin signaling. Important safety note: for people with type 1 diabetes, insulin is essential and life-saving. Nothing here should be interpreted as a suggestion that anyone stop necessary insulin therapy.
Any discussion of changing insulin regimens should be done under medical supervision. Number 2. Drugs that boost your pancreas's insulin secretion can backfire if supply isn't addressed. Several diabetes medicines work by encouraging the pancreas to release more insulin in response to food. Sulfonylureas and some other secretagogues directly stimulate insulin release. GLP-1 receptor agonists, the class that includes medications many people hear about, stimulate a glucose-dependent insulin response and slow gastric emptying, which can help with appetite control. They look healthy because they help with weight and glycemic numbers for many people. But the mechanism still increases insulin exposure. More insulin, more frequent insulin spikes, which increases the workload of tissues and can load already full cells with extra fuel. If the underlying carbohydrate load remains high, increasing insulin secretion is often treating the symptom, high blood glucose, while perpetuating the supply-side problem, too much glucose arriving at tissues. That's not an argument against these medicines. They have real benefits and appropriate indications, but it is an argument for pairing pharmacologic strategies with changes that reduce how often and how much insulin must be released. These medications can be essential and beneficial for many people, and the goal here is not to discourage their use, but to explain how lifestyle factors interact with insulin biology. Number 3. Insulin sensitizers that lower glucose without reducing supply can mask the root cause. Some therapies improve blood sugar by changing how the body moves or handles glucose rather than by reducing carbohydrate intake. Metformin, for example, reduces hepatic glucose output and has multiple actions that lower blood glucose and in some cases improve insulin sensitivity. Thiazolidinediones act on fat tissue distribution. These are valuable tools. Mechanistically, though, if these agents simply make tissues take up or hold on to glucose more efficiently while the person keeps eating a lot of carbs, the net effect can still be an increased intracellular fuel burden. In other words, you lower blood sugar numbers, but you may still be supplying cells more fuel than they can safely burn, so the full locker problem remains unresolved. The practical implication is not to abandon these drugs, they are often appropriate, but to recognize they may be masking the supply problem unless accompanied by dietary and behavioral changes. Number 4, grazing, frequent meals, and constant snacking increase insulin frequency. Many people have been told to eat small meals and snacks all day to keep energy even and avoid hypoglycemia. For athletes or certain clinical conditions, this can make sense, but for someone with insulin resistance or at risk of type 2 diabetes, constant feeding means constant insulin signaling.
Each meal or snack triggers an insulin response. When those responses occur every couple of hours or more often, cells are rarely given a chance to empty their storage lockers. Frequent insulin spikes teach the body to maintain a fed state and to prioritize storage rather than shifting toward burning stored fuel. A typical example: someone eats 3 meals plus multiple snacks and caffeinated sweetened lattes between meals. Even if the snacks seem healthy, trail mix, granola bars, fruit smoothies, the insulin frequency keeps cells loaded and receptive to further downregulation. Allowing longer intervals between meals or practicing time-restricted eating reduces the number of insulin exposures and gives tissues time to utilize stored fuel, which helps restore sensitivity. Number 5. Healthy carbohydrate staples and drinks that chronically raise insulin demand. Whole grains, certain dairy products, fruit juices, starchy vegetables, and many so-called healthy packaged foods can be much higher in available carbohydrate than people realize. Fruit juice is a prime example. It concentrates sugar and produces a rapid glucose rise without the fiber matrix of whole fruit. Whole grain cereals and even some breads are marketed as healthy but still deliver large amounts of glucose. Consistently consuming these staples creates repeated high insulin demands, which keeps the storage lockers packed. Over time, tissues reduce their responsiveness. The physiological point is simple: the type and amount of carbohydrate matters. Replacing concentrated or refined carb sources with lower-carb alternatives, prioritizing non-starchy vegetables and whole protein and fat meals, and treating juices and sugary drinks as occasional rather than daily choices will lower the supply pressure on insulin and help cells recover. Number 6. Supplements that increase insulin sensitivity can unintentionally push fuel into full cells. Several natural compounds, green tea extract, cinnamon, apple cider vinegar, chromium, have research suggesting they improve insulin action or blunt post-meal glucose spikes. That sounds ideal, and in many situations they help modestly. But imagine you increase insulin action pharmacologically while continuing a high-carbohydrate diet. More glucose gets pulled into cells more efficiently, and if those cells are already full, the extra uptake increases intracellular overload. The net effect can be more storage stress, not less. The nuance is important. These supplements can be useful as part of an overall plan that also reduces carbohydrate intake and meal frequency, but they are unlikely to solve the root supply problem by themselves. Using them without dietary change may lower blood glucose numbers while the underlying metabolic stress persists. Number 7.
calorie-focused advice that preserves high carbohydrate patterns. Eat less, move more, without changing carbs.
Fiber-rich whole foods and intact vegetables help reduce rapid glucose excursions compared with processed carb foods. Use targeted exercise to increase insulin-independent glucose uptake. Muscle contraction during resistance training and high-intensity interval exercise allows muscle cells to take up glucose without insulin. This helps create demand inside the cells, emptying the lockers, and improves overall glucose handling. Building or preserving lean muscle mass increases the tissue available to burn glucose and fatty acids. Address sleep, stress, and inflammation. Poor sleep and chronic stress raise counter-regulatory hormones like cortisol that can increase blood sugar and insulin resistance. Improving sleep quality and stress management supports a metabolic environment in which insulin sensitivity can recover. Be cautious and strategic with medications and supplements. Medications like metformin or GLP-1 agonists and supplements such as cinnamon or green tea may have important roles. Use them as part of a broader plan that reduces carbohydrate supply and meal frequency rather than as the sole strategy. Importantly, do not stop or adjust prescription medications on your own. Discuss changes with your clinician so that drug therapy and lifestyle changes can be coordinated safely. A few realistic examples to make this concrete. If you currently drink 1 or 2 fruit smoothies a day and have small carb-based snacks between meals, your insulin exposure may be high even if those choices feel natural or healthy. A practical next step could be replacing one smoothie with a whole food breakfast of eggs, vegetables, and a small portion of fruit, and testing how extending your overnight fasting window by 1 hour affects hunger and energy. If you're on insulin for type 2 diabetes and curious whether a lower-carb diet could reduce your insulin needs, bring this up with your prescribing clinician. They can help adjust doses safely while monitoring blood glucose to avoid hypoglycemia. Let me be clear about a few important cautions. I'm not promising guaranteed cures or complete reversal. Insulin and medications save lives and improve outcomes for many people. Changing diet, meal timing, and activity can reduce insulin exposure and improve metabolic health for a lot of individuals, but results vary and need individualized medical oversight. If you're taking prescribed medications, especially insulin or agents that can cause low blood sugar, do not change or stop them without clinician guidance. The takeaway is straightforward. Insulin is primarily a storage hormone. When we chronically supply more carbohydrate and repeatedly stimulate insulin, we fill the cellular lockers. Pushing more fuel into already full cells, whether with extra insulin, drugs that increase insulin secretion, frequent meals, high-carb, healthy staples, or supplements that increase insulin action without changing supply, tends to deepen insulin resistance. The most durable approach is to address the supply side. Reduce carbohydrate load, lower the frequency of insulin spikes, create cellular demand through targeted exercise, and support sleep and stress resilience so tissues can empty, regain responsiveness, and burn fuel more effectively. If you want more practical guides on how to reduce insulin exposure safely, check the pinned resources below and talk with your healthcare provider about a plan tailored for you. If this explanation helped you understand the mechanics behind those surprising, healthy habits, share this video with someone who's struggling with stubborn blood sugar or weight, and come back for the next video where we walk step by step through sensible lower-carb meal patterns and safe ways to adjust medications under medical supervision.